I think we should start right now. So again, as I said before, my name is Giovanni Frigo. I've been a postdoc here at KIT for almost 6 years. Today is the 4th day of the conference in our conceptualization of this, so it's not something completely separated. It's actually like a continuation, but with a thematic specifications, let's say, about energy ethics. So in these 10 minutes, I tell you a bit about the also institutional organization behind this, so you have an idea. And a bit about what we have been doing during the past 5-6 years on this topic through public outreach events, academic events, creation, let's say, organization, as well as some publications. Many of you already know many of these things because of previous collaborations, etc. And if you are here, probably we already have interacted to some extent. But we are very happy that we wanted to do this, and also the fPET steering committee said, it's a good idea, let's create something different, satellite workshop at the end of that. All right, so I hope everybody has a general picture of the institutional arrangements here. So Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, this bigger organization, one of the 9 technical universities in Germany, one of the largest ones. Then this follows up on Raffaella's presentation from the very first day. ITAS, so our Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis, 150 people, mostly doing research, located a kilometer away from the campus where most of KIT activities go on. So separate also in terms of location. It's about a kilometer from here, next to Europaplatz. And this institute has about 12, 13 groups doing many different things, from life cycle assessment of batteries to studies of different types of concrete to forestry projects and invasive species. One of the groups is called PhilETAS, so Philosophy of Engineering, Technology Assessment and Science. And this is the group established by Raffaella Elbrandt, who is the speaker in the early afternoon, since 2015, and when she came to KIT. So this is the Venn diagram of what's going on. Most of the people who organized the conference in the past 3 days, and today included, are part of PhilETAS, and we are about 15 people, oscillating up and down depending on migrations and so on. And we are a quite international group. We work only or mostly in English, and that's why also these events are trying to reach English audience in a broader way. All right, so as part of the activities of the group, we have this kind of informal energy ethics project going on, which fits also the lines of funding that are coming to us from the Helmholtz Association for Research. So we are supposed to do research about energy. And how we frame that, or have been framing that over the years, is energy ethics. And so several people in the group, this is a mixture of PhDs and postdocs, work on different topics according to their PhD project or according to their freedom of inquiry, let's say, as part of being senior researchers. These are some of the topics, for example, that have been explored so far, and there are publications or events attached to them. So climate ethics, loss and damage, stranded assets, also a part of that. The relationship between energy consumption and well-being. Some of you also have published on that. So different aspects about morality in design, also sometimes attempts to be in dialogue with other approaches about values in design from the Netherlands and so on. There is a strong connection between here and the 40U Alliance of Technical Universities in the Netherlands. Issues of mobility, justice, so energy justice and mobility justice, 2 people working specifically on that, and so on. So you can read this. So in general, some of the, we share some, also we can call them maybe theoretical assumptions, that about energy, there are transitions in the plural going on around the world. They happen at different pace, with different requirements, with different scales. So there is a lot of pluralism. These are value-laden. This is also an assumption. Just by looking, for example, at the formulation of the SDGs, or SDG 7, it's the most usually important for us working in energy topics. The adjectives used there in the definitions, how it is presented, described, point to some values, and so it's interesting philosophically to also look at them. We try to do an interdisciplinary effort. This is the mantra of ITAS, the institute. We even were put in offices with people from other groups on purpose to try to foster interdisciplinary, at least chats, maybe leading to collaborations. Different people try to reach out to other disciplines, especially engineers at KIT, since KIT is so strong in mechanical disciplines, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, mechatronics, informatics, and so on. And maybe this is obvious to many of you, but examples of ethical aspects, dimensions, values, and so on within energy transitions can be this responsibility, attention to future generations, energy justice, some of the things that we talk about today. All right. Because there are other places around the world that are doing something similar to energy ethics, or they call it energy ethics as well, at some point, especially the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, with which we are very, very close friends, we felt the need to kind of clarify what in general we try to do, or some of us try to do. This then becomes a bit more subjective. You understand, it's not the manifesto of the group. Maybe it's more some people wanted to put this out there, so that it is not only energy ethics in a descriptive sense, so that like an anthropologist goes to an energy project somewhere, captures the preferences of people, and evaluates the justice dimensions, stuff like that. We thought that as philosophers or ethicists with environmental energy interest, we should develop something that is normative, so prescriptive, trying to, in a considerate and reasonable way, provide also some should statement, recommendations, some kind of, time is running, we have several urgent issues to address, and maybe it's time also, once you have an overview, provide some guidance with moral implication, or just moral guidance to people who are in positions of power and might choose something over something else. So how we frame that is that an energy ethics that is normative is a systematic theoretical investigation that tries to analyze what's out there, evaluate stakeholder preferences. So that's the need for collaborations with social scientists to grasp that, be able to judge the merit and worth of choices, actions, policies, so text or speeches, utterances, and recommend by building arguments. And that's where the philosophy comes in, and it's maybe a bit different from other social sciences approaches to energy ethics. Since 2021, we have organized a series of events of different size and quality and type. We started with a pre-pandemic event that was meant to be in person, then became hybrid, eventually became online only, with all kinds of struggles about organization. But as a first attempt, we tried to look into some underexplored normative ethical approaches, like capabilities approach, care ethics, and virtue ethics in the context of a 3-day event, where about 80 people participated. And as far as I know, for example, and that this is my personal goal for today, is that brought to about 5 publications of different people in the years following, that I'm aware of at least. And so these days have this kind of, for me, importance to foster collaborations towards publications or just general collaborations. Then we go to last year and this year, where we had, this is incomplete. You can look at the ITAS YouTube channel for the recordings. We had 12 lectures, online only, in this case, from people from all over the world, who half of them also came to Karlsruhe to have interactions with our group and ITAS at large, giving essentially expert lectures like today, but in general about their understanding of energy ethics in different directions, in different, with their own style. So from different parts of the world with different backgrounds and disciplinary affiliation and commitments. And we get to the final slides here. Yes. So for example, these are examples. So continuing our input, capabilities, energy rights. So for example, the European Union, an interest group was interested in, sorry for the repetition, it was interested in exploring how, from a political standpoint, we can recognize a right to access electricity or energy services in general. So some of us collaborated to this report that then was picked up by European Commission, and they are working on trying to devise what the right to energy is, because once you allocate or grant a right to 5 million people, 500 million people, maybe you need to think about theoretical implications at the very start. This is an example of energy and the good life. So this correlation or important relationship between amounts of energy consumed by people at the individual basis and different metrics for how they are doing in life, so well-being. That is an example of designing for care, so how care ethics might inform the design and management of energy systems at small scale, like a neighborhood battery supercapacitor or battery container system for electricity microgrids. This is an example of playing with literature, so energy utopias, climate fiction in the context of the SDGs, so how much ideas become part of narratives that becomes part of also climate fiction books that influence policy. The center here is by Eike and a former colleague, Laura Garcia Portela, who is now at the University of Rotterdam, about ethics of climate change loss and damage, so how people have different normative expectations about what happens when they lose, for example, their assets because of energy transitions or just because of flooding or other things. And last example is an example of a 2024 collaboration with people from the UK, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and Portugal, about trying to get into the energy justice debate from a philosophical standpoint, because many times people say, yeah, you say energy ethics is a bit different from energy justice, but what does that mean? That paper clarifies a bit what philosophy can help or strengthen the energy justice frameworks by bringing in some reflections about the assumptions, theoretical assumptions, but also argumentations development. All right.
In a couple of seconds, we're going to hear a talk from Dr. Ranran. And Dr. Ranran is a senior research fellow at Global Megacity Governance Institute, Shenzhen University. And her research interests are in comparative environmental politics, climate change, and urban governance. Prior to joining Shenzhen University, Dr. Ran held the position of associate professor at Renmin University of China. She earned a PhD from the University of Duisburg-Essen in 2009, and from 2009 to 2010, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Southern California. Dr. Ran's publications have appeared in Journal of Environmental Policy and Planning, China Quarterly, Journal of Cleaner Production, among others. Her 2015 book systematically examined the paradox of environmental policy implementation gap in China's local environmental politics. Dr. Ran was selected as one of the Chinese highly cited researchers in political science by Elsevier in 2021, 2022, and 2023. And her talk in the energetics workshop will deal with the ethics of energy policy in China. So, Dr. Ran, welcome on the stage.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and also want to thank you, the whole entire team, for inviting me to be in this conference. I learned a lot as an outsider. For example, with all the theoretical tools of carrying design, I realized this probably not designed for me. So I hope everyone can still see me. As a political scientist, today I'm going to talk about the performance without legitimacy, energy justice, and China's authoritarian environmentalism. So when you think about China, you might have a conflict image. One is green and one is red. And then the green China probably representative authoritarian part, and then the green image represents more of the renewable cleaner energy and the very progressive environmental cleanup campaigns in recent decades. So if you think about China from the perspective of energy consumption, now China has the world's largest greenhouse gas emissions, and it consumes more coal than the rest of the world combined. And over the last 10 years, China's proof generation from wind and solar has risen around the world. So you can see this trend goes up very quickly in terms of emissions and also in terms of energy consumption. But in terms of emissions per capita, China still in the middle. I think it's around the same as Germany. So. But the energy issues is often related with the environmental issues. China, to clean up China's environment, the Chinese government announced a very ambitious plan, which we call this dual carbon coal plan, DCGS. So. Xi announced it in 2020 that China would reach its carbon emissions peak before 2030 and became carbon neutral before 2060. So this ambitious plan, if it can be implemented national-wise, is still a question we need to examine across different multiple disciplines. So when we talk about the China's environmental politics, we often will say China is one of the most polluted country in the world. There's a lot of reasons to explain this. For example, the traffic jam in Beijing back to 1980s when I was born. The traffic jams is more about the bicycles, and there's so many bicycles on the street. But later, in 2010, you can see all these cars, because the middle class, they think every Chinese. Maybe should I? It's okay. It's off.
It's on.
It's on. Okay, thank you. Thank you for this caring organizers. It's gonna change rapidly because of the economic development. But still there is a lot of mining going on. For example, this is Linfen city, has been identified as the most polluted city in the world. So when I did my fieldwork there, and then the local officials, their main KPI performance is to how to remove there from the most polluted cities in the world. So And also, like a lot of environmental activities bottom up from the society. This is a picture in the Peking University campus, and the students' environmental activities, they trying to put the mask on those famous campus statues to remind people how the air pollution can be bad for their health. And even this Beijing grandma put a mask on her dog, but this became very controversial on social media because the dog probably won't be able to breathe, because this is a really good N95 mask. So I probably won't put it on my daughter's face. But again, this just shows us like how the pollution, air pollution, can be in the big cities like Beijing. And then when I did my fieldwork in Xiamen, one of the coast city in China, there is the biggest protest for chemical factory. This is called one of the biggest protests after Tiananmen. So the kids, they hold this banner and said, if we can't survive here in Xiamen, and let's go to the Mars, and then probably we can send, if he can go, I probably can go with Elon Musk, right? So, and yeah, this is how people has this strong awareness of the environmental issues, but also like in recently, and then Beijing has the worst sandstorm in decade, came in 20 after the right in the middle of a pandemic, and then last year is the worst flood in Beijing. And then this is the very typical gate for the village. Now you can see that like the water is almost goes up to the very top of the gate. So then people, we will ask like why environmental policy fail, because on the paper it seems we have a very good environmental and energy policies, but why the reality looks a little different. But this is I don't think this is a unique China problem. So the implementation gap is actually everywhere, in every country and in every policy area. But how to understand those environmental policy failure across local, national, and global levels is one of the major topics for environmental political scientists. But when we look at the literature, the environmental policy failure, primarily we think this is an effectiveness issue. So they failed because they are not effective. And then those effectiveness are assessed through quantitative evaluation of environmental performance, what we call it KPIs, right? Key performance index. And it can be also called performance cynicism, like people are too obsessed with the performance, and then performance became the only index to evaluate our work. So like for academia, right, how many publications they have sometimes became the only evaluation criteria, no matter what is our teaching from the others. So this kind of KPIs and also very dominant in the environmental policy area in China. For example, like in the Huwen area, this is the area before the Xi Jinping. So there is a very prominent issue of policy: do not leave the forbidden city, which means the policy just stay at the policymaker level. So it's hard to be implemented at the local level. So through the lines of environmental performance and the environmental policy failure often appear as the consequences of various degrees of policy implementation gap. And those gaps, the mainstream literature think this is because of low effectiveness, and it's a major challenge for China's environmental politics is the implementation issue. But why there is an implementation gap, the current literature actually explains this from the institutional wise, incentive structure, implementation capacity, and public participation, among others. So this is a well-researched area. And then this picture shows like the central policy is always good, like Xi Jinping said, the green water and the green mountains are also golden mountains and the silver mountains, which means ecological civilization and the environmental protection, energy saving should be the same as the economic development. So this brings the Xi's authoritarian environmentalism, which is quite different from the previous leadership. Because the previous leadership, the problem is the policy cannot go outside the forbidden city. But in the Xi's area, what we call is authoritarian environmentalism. But there is a debate on China is a model of authoritarian environmentalism or environmental authoritarianism. So it's an AE or it's EA. I think it's also up to the different perceptions. We can probably debate this later on. But one of my reasons I use the AE model is environmental authoritarianism is a quite political sensitive word in China's academia. So I have kind of a self-censorship when I write my articles to use authoritarianism, because China a lot of people in China don't think China is authoritarianism at all, but this has a different opinions outside China. So what Xi's authoritarianism is, the first is that this means effective top-down means for environmental governance. So there's iron-handed crackdowns on pollutions. For example, to relocate the polluted factories with certain period without the approval from the business owners. And then the second is a centrally initiated campaign-style inspection. So the central level government sent the working team to the local government to check how the local government's efforts on clean up the environment. And then the third is a forceful shuttering or relocation of factory. I mentioned this. And then the fourth is a surveillance of the internet and the online data. So this is all to be make part of the Xi's authoritarian environmentalism model. But if we use this model to see this model from the perspective of energy and the environmental justice, then we will definitely see not only the benefit of the model, but also the huge social cost of China's EA model. The effectiveness of this EOA model lies in its ability to make a quick and a centralized policy to address those issues. But the impacts of this implementation strategy at local levels remain subject to debate. And then the energy and the environmental justice concerns is whose interests are prioritized. And then also the social and the environmental justice and the fairness issues in the implementation of this many effective top-down environmental policy instrument. So here I give the case of the one of my how can I go back? Yeah, I have it, but oh no, I think this almost oh okay. Sorry, we need more engineers.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. So tell me here where you want to go.
I think that's for my case study. That's up. Yes, probably. I think here. Is it
This one.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, it's out.
Yes.
Oops. Okay, thank you very much. I recently did a research on the Hebei's ban on coal furnace project. So I published in Environmental Policy and Planning. So if you're interested, I can share this article with you. So the case study is on the Hebei's ban on a coal furnace, like in the rural area household. So they actually mostly use the coal furnace and the stove for heating and cooking. So, but to address Beijing's air pollution problem, the government urged the Hebei residents to switch from a coal-powered heating to gas or electricity. So in 2017, under the continuous pressures from the central government. So Hebei province is a neighbor province of Beijing. They are very close. So the Hebei launched the BCF project with a campaign-style approach that targeted users of residential coal heating in the rural area. And then during the fall and the winter of the seasons of 2017, Hebei province quickly completes the conversion of coal to gas or electricity for 2.33 billion households. It's really a large number of households. And they exceeding the central government target by 30%. This really surprised everyone, like even the central government official, because we often see the policies can't be implemented effectively at the local levels. But in this case, the policy has been implemented very well. They even exceeded the central government expectations and their target. To give a comparison, it took Beijing for more than 20 years to switch 1 billion households from coal to gas and electricity for residential heating. But in Hebei, it just took a winter. So, but this is at a huge cost of energy justice. So, for example, in the banner we see, and then in the rural area when we did the field work, they're saying like whenever coal is seen, stove will be dismantled. If smoke is spotted, house will be torn down. So this is a very air-handed way of so this raises the question is if we have a very good environmental ends, can we do anything to realize it? Is it legitimized to do everything to just follow Beijing's blue sky and to clean up Beijing's pollution? So this actually asked by the interviews. When I interviewed them, so one of their question is why I should be responsible for to clean up the Beijing's blue sky, right? So why should my stoves to be taken? So but of course this is a very effective approach, right? We can never imagine can be happen in Germany. So yesterday I heard a talk like even for smart electronic meters, like right, the most of the Germans like will against this proposed to install the smart because they worried about the data and privacy issues. But in Beijing, this blue sky actually back. So it's, if you probably Carl can know this much better because you are a benefit from this campaign, but I'm a benefit too. But the cost is one of the costs. I believe is the distributive the high effective was gained at the cost of energy justice. So and the concept of energy justice, I think I don't even need to explain it. So I will explain. I will analyze this from 3 different perspectives for energy justice. One is distributive justice, which means ensure that energy resources and benefits such as access to electricity, clean energy technologies, and affordable energy prices are distributed equally around our communities, and also address energy poverty by ensuring that low-income and marginalized communities have access to affordable and reliable energy services. But the problem in this case, I did my field work is no heating at the school because this project of for example, there is a neglect of the residents' rights, interests, and needs. The first one is the insufficient of supply of gas, because they did this project too sudden, and then there is no enough gas supplies during the winter, and then this caused the no heating issues at the schools and also in the hospital. And then the second is the inadequate government supply subsidies. The government promised to give subsidies for the villagers to buy gas and also the equipment of the gas burning stoves, but this money is not enough for them to get the same heating levels as previous. So, and also the cost of the gas is quite expensive. Their most concern is unsatisfactory low indoor temperature in the winters. When I did the interview, one of the my interview said, if you wanted me to die, because of hunger or because of no heating or because of pollution. And I was like, it's a hard choice. I don't want to die for hunger, right? Because die for hunger is very humiliating, especially in the Chinese context, which means I'm very poor. So which means like we need job because I need food. So and then let's actually ask very sensitive questions about the triangle relations of environment, economy, and the energy. So I also don't want to die because I'm so cold and I don't have a heating. So I think maybe to die because of pollution is the last choice, because I don't know if I don't do this research, I probably don't know how the air pollution can lead me to die. At least I won't die very soon, right? Probably it took 10 years if I have like a lung cancer. So then this really puzzled me when I did this research. For example, the media, social medias have these pictures of the kids. They did a final exam outdoors in the winters because there's no heating at school, and then the media also report the hospital, the doctor need to give a surgery to patients, also no heatings. So this is extremely tough for them. And then some of the, I quote the media citation, like the doctor said, when the heating fails, doctors are forced to rely on their mental stress to keep their patients warm. So yeah, so this is also again like can be echoes some of the questions we discussed with the caring designers. So then one of the subtitles of China Youth Daily says, "Still no heating. Students running in the sports field to warm up." This is another media coverage on how the elderly people they are suffering because of no heating. So this is the first perspective as distributive justice, and the second is procedural justice. So procedural justice is more about inclusive decision making, transparency, and accountability. So I think a lot of us are already familiar with those concepts, so I won't go into detail. I just analyze this through my case study. So what's the reason and what is the motivation to do this project, to take the rural areas, burn the coal burning stoves and the furnace? And then it's not because the local needs for the blue sky. It's mostly because this is the drive behind is originally more from the leadership's strong political will to fight for Beijing's blue sky rather than from effort to meet the local people's need. For example, in 2019, the then party secretary of Hebei Province Party Committee, so which means the number one in Hebei's government, told the media that Hebei was willing to sacrifice its own GDP growth to ensure Beijing's blue sky and white clouds. So this means like the Hebei local officials, in order to impress Beijing, their leadership, they would rather to sacrifice the local need in their own province. So that's raised the question of, for example, like this handed crackdown. For example, like they say, anyone who burns coal will be arrested. Although this is not the law, but this is just like a temporary policy to scare people and push them to switch to gas, and also. The third point is the recognition justice. The acknowledging vulnerable groups, they should recognize and respect the unique needs and vulnerabilities of different groups, particularly those who have historically been marginalized or disadvantaged by energy system. And in China, this is the case for the rural area, especially those villagers. And also, they have strong cultural sensitivities. For example, there is in this project that we call it a heating crisis. The Hebei people are afraid for Beijing's blue sky, and then there is safety concerns over the installation of the natural gas pipelines because the local villagers, they're getting used to the coal burn stoves, so they feel like the natural gas pipelines are a little risky and make them have some safety concerns. And also the substandard quality of newly installed heating system, and they distrust this kind of heating system. And then they also lack of know-how and culture on how to use this non-coal heating and cooking system. For example, they'll say food prepared using the non-coal system doesn't taste as good as that made with traditional methods. So this is a huge for local villagers because they want their own authentic food made by their previous coal burning stoves. So this is the actual the cognitive justice part. So this cartoon shows like the old villager said like to switch to the gas is a good stuff, but I don't know how to use it. I don't know it's safe or not. I don't know it's convenient or not. Anyway, it's not my habit. So this is one of the cartoon I found in the social media. So the public debate on this controversial project actually also reflect on the energy injustice issues, and then they think this injustice faced by the vulnerable groups such as children, elderly, and medical patients who are injured disappropriately hardship, and arguing that access to heating during the winter is a fundamental human right, surpassing the need for year-round clean air. So this again raises the debate, and clean air is a human right, or the heating is a human right. Of course, they are both human right, but we need there is a conflict of interest. For example, one of interview from Beijing emphasized like access to heating during winter should be regarded as a fundamental human right, and she firmly stated her preference for heating over fresh air if forced to choose. Then the Sydney villager said the sentiment that while they support environmental protection, it is too difficult to stay at home without heating in the winter. And also people complained about they can't cook the traditional stir-fried dishes because of this project. So despite this project is very effective and very successful in achieving environmental performance and significantly contribute to the air quality improvement in the region, and then the rapid campaign-style implementation lead to huge issues for residents. They sparking criticism and public complaints that were magnified by national media spotlights. And the discourse around this heating crisis encapsulated by a phrase like Hebei people phrase for Beijing's blue sky. It highlights the energy justice cost associated with the aggressive pursuit of environmental goals and the policy legitimacy challenge of the BCF project. That's why in my analytic framework in my article, I said it is performance without legitimacy, question mark. So in this framework, they said it's authoritarian environmentalism, but the whole process will lead to legitimacy deficits because the excessive campaign style implementation and it's raised big issues on justice and legitimacy. So and to have it happened again. It can't go back again. Can we sorry.
It's okay.
How many minutes is still left?
Yeah, 5-10 minutes.
Okay.
It's part of the game.
Okay.
It's all right.
So I'm almost done. So I will try to brief so that we can save time for more Q&A sections. So I just wrap it up, and then this state-led authoritarian environmentalism can be very effective in both policy output and outcome in terms of environmental performance, and the trading the Hebei's coal furnaces for Beijing's blue sky is a top leader's strong political view, and then the local level officials, to impress the top leaders, they choose to have an excessive campaign-style implementation to show their loyalty to Beijing through the sacrifice of local interests and need. So this table, I try to summarize the performance legitimacy dilemma of China's authoritarian environmentalism model. But I think academic scholars like dilemmas, right? It give us opportunities to publish more articles. But in reality, so imagine I'm the villagers like has no heating. So of course, I don't want to suffering for that. So yeah, so I just want to conclude with this, and thank you very much for being here. Okay, this is the article.
Thank you, Dr. Ran, for the great presentation. So let's get to the Q&A. Comments, questions? Yeah, Rafaela.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was really, really interesting. And I like probably everybody who's interested in environmental issues, I'm sort of torn in between this top-down approach, which you called the authoritarian approach, and, well, the criticism you raised on the last slide. But I'm just wondering, I mean, it seems to be very effective what China has done. So this authoritarian approach seems to be very effective, but how would we measure the effectiveness? I mean, we know that it worked, okay, but what to compare it to? How can we be sure that a bottom-up approach or a combination of top-down, bottom-up would have been not equally as effective or even more effective? So you're a social scientist, so I would be really curious to know how to measure.
That mic is not working.
Okay. Yeah, this work. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this. Great questions. I think in terms of how to measure the effectiveness, right? This is I think this is a key questions in that article. Now in that article I measured it according to the air quality improvement, to see like what Beijing has done in the 20 years, like what level of air quality has been improved, and then what has done in Hebei area, and how. So in that sense, like I draw a conclusion that this is very effective. But the problem is like we can't compare with a different approach because the China don't have the experiment for the top down, for the bottom up. It's all top down. So if we want to do some comparative research, maybe we want to do it with some countries with similar, probably South Korea, right? How Seoul clean up their pollution. But what I hear is like, because the South Korea pollution now is largely because China, because the transporter, the pollution just goes to Seoul very quickly because it only takes 40 minutes from Beijing to Seoul. So it's very close, and they're probably, so they often complain how the pollution attack them. So unfortunately, I don't have kind of comparative research on it, but it would be nice to do some. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I see Carl Mitcham first, and then Adam, and then, okay, 1, 2, 3, yep.
That was a wonderful presentation. Very nice, thank you. I learned a lot about my own experience, what I was been experiencing in China for that same period of time. I certainly experienced the cleaning up those skies. I benefited from Hebei's sacrifice. My question concerns what's been the reaction in China to your articles? Have you published in Chinese about this kind of article? You said you couldn't use authoritarian environmentalism or environmental authoritarianism as a term in China, right?
Yeah.
So but you've published about this in English at least. People in China have read it. And have you published anything in Chinese? So a little bit more about where else you've published and scholarly reactions or public reactions.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Yeah, my original plan for this research project is to have 3 publications. Well, 2 in Chinese, 1 in English, and then English is the last one. I have been trying to publish for this project for almost 6 to 7 years, and then the Chinese publication is extremely difficult. I have been rejected by 11 journals. Some of journals don't even give any response because the sensitive topic. But later on, I found some ways to go through and finally published a good case, which is about how Beijing benefit from the Hebei project. So it's a frame in a different way. Frame it as a good story. If you compare my Chinese version, and then this is quite different from the English version I published. I think I might get criticized because I try to catering some Chinese audience and also catering English word audience, right? By being more critical about China's environmental policy. My response would be, I just caught in the middle. Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah. So I need probably to get more so-called intellectual embassy so that I can be feel. Yeah. So this is it's a hard decision.
Yeah, is this, I agree with Carl, that was a great talk. Very interesting, well organized, thank you. I'm gonna sneak in a quick question and then one, it could be a yes or no answer, and then one you can elaborate on quickly. This getting gas, is China turning towards Russia now to supply gas? It seems like yes. Maybe you could say more about that or not, but my longer question is the legitimacy aspect. You told me that will get turned more on the local government than the central government. I just wonder if you can elaborate on who's going to suffer a crisis of legitimacy in China from this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I often ask myself about why I use this so abstract concept of legitimacy. What I mean when I talk about legitimacy, because political scientists like the concept of legitimacy, and also from some point authoritarianism country will automatically suffering from the lack of legitimacy, right? But China, very interesting. The central government still enjoy quite high levels of legitimacy in terms of political trust towards the government. The survey shows the central government enjoy much higher trust than probably Germany and some other democratic countries. But the local governments actually suffered a lot in terms of legitimacy. Generally, people don't trust the local level a lot. So there is a legitimacy gap between the central and government. The one of the phrase I found in my fieldwork is they said the central emperor is our relatives. But the local cadres in the village is our enemy. So yeah, so someone far away from you, they are really good, but someone close to me, they are all bad. So and in my case, definitely is the central, is the local government, because it's the local officials who took their furnace away, right? It's not that Xi Jinping took their furnace away, and Xi Jinping is the man who bring the blue sky to Beijing and all around the, right? So this is definitely, I think there is also political science research on, so Chinese government generally benefit from this gap, because so to maintain the whole society, because as long as the people still trust the central government, and then the central government has enjoy a lot of authorities to rule.
I saw, yeah, Claudia.
Thank you very much for your talk. This was excellent. What I'm a bit puzzled by is why this is being framed as you need to lose your heating system for the clean skies in Beijing. That's so incredibly reductionist just to look at these clean skies, because in Europe we're also trying to persuade people to decarbonize, but there it's a much wider carbon argument. One tries to make a comfort argument, and if people are heating with wood or with coal, then it's actually an awkward system to use. So there are many, many more factors. And I was wondering why this has been sort of caricatured in terms of the blue skies.
Yeah, this is a good question, because China did this in a very sudden way. So it's not like a step by step. So actually the local and both the central and local and also the market are not prepared for this sudden change. So they just took the furnace and the stove away without have enough gas supplies and instrument provided for the local household. So then this brings this emergency of has no heating in the winter. So if they can plan this earlier and then debate and have a so-called of bottom-up discussions, so that the villager they can prepare not only economically but also psychologically and culturally, they will be much easier in this process. It's just like it's a top-down campaign style approach. It's just like I have to take your furnace, and then no matter you accept it or not. Yeah.
I do understand this. I'm just wondering, why is it framed in terms of blue skies for Beijing and not all of the other advantages that this would bring?
Yeah, because the local Hebei people, they don't care the blue sky that much. Because for there the most important, as the interview said, I care more about I'm hungry or not. I care more about I have a heating, I'm warm enough or not. So their environmental awareness are not higher enough to realize, like how bad it is, the pollution. Like I might get cancer because of that. Yeah, so they are in a different developed levels. Although they are benefit from blue sky in general, but their priorities are still to have food, to have a job, and to have a heater.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Kind of two questions here. One was, what do you think the relative impact of all the cars in Beijing versus the households in the rural area burning coal was on the pollution level?
Yes, yeah.
And then go ahead and answer that one. Yeah.
Okay, that's a wonderful question. When we look at the status, like which is the major contributor for Beijing's blue sky, the middle class cars or the rural people stoves, right? And then of course it's middle class cars, but can you take them away? Right? So it's all about like a different interest group. They fight each other, but the rural people is the weakest, right? They are not powerful enough. They don't have the big weapons to resist. So yeah. So that's why they pick them as to sacrifice most. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my second question had to do with the KPIs that you mentioned earlier. And I think you talked about them mostly in the context of research publications, but I was also wondering, because they were using the metaphors of blue skies Does the government use KPIs at all?
Yes, yeah. For environmental governance, Chinese government use a lot of KPIs. We call it environmental and energy target. And then certain levels of government, they must meet those targets. In the Wuhan area, like say 20 years ago, those are soft targets. It means like very flexible to meet or not meet. The officials don't get punished because they fail to meet those targets. But in Xi Jinping's area, those are hard targets. The officials has to meet those targets. Otherwise, they won't get promoted. Yeah, so this is a really strong incentive for the officials in terms of environmental and energy KPIs.
Yeah, hello. Thank you also from my side. So in 2008 were the Summer Olympics in Beijing. So my question is about, this is now 12 years from that, but your research is in between,
Yeah.
from a temporal standpoint, right? So my question is, because I remember there were a lot of complaints, international exposure, and so some shame about the sky and so
Right.
on. How much that was used by authorities, by the authoritarian environmentalism project to justify then these more iron-handed, as you portrayed, strategies or policies?
That's excellent questions. It actually bring back the history of why Beijing clean up its blue sky. It's mostly because of Olympic Games. Again, the drive is not from inside. So unfortunately, like we hope the Chinese people can drive this train, but it's the foreign, like because we want to show Beijing has blue sky to the foreigner, to the whole the international community. So the Chinese and Beijing government, Central and Beijing government did a lot of projects to clean up Beijing's, and then that's the when the Beijing's coal ban on furnace project started, and then after 20 years, they think this is a very successful experience, and then should be can be transferred to the neighborhood provinces, and then they started to do this, and then another interesting blue sky called APEC blue in Beijing. If you heard that, APEC blue is a kind of blue like only created for the APEC. You guys know what is APEC is, right? Asia Pacific, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. Yeah, that was I was there in Beijing during APEC. The blue sky are very impressive. They just be able, the government be able to have this blue sky for 3 months. So it's only 3 months campaign Beijing can have blue sky. So this is how it works. Yeah. So it's also to show like Beijing has this. This also controversial because the people say, why during the APEC blue sky period, Beijing middle class the residents they are not to drive cars. So then they also sacrifice slightly because this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the last Q&A for this session.
So I'm happy to introduce our next expert talk and our next speaker, which is Adam Briggle. So Adam is a professor in the Philosophy and Religion department at the University of North Texas. He has a PhD in environmental studies with an emphasis in science and technology policy research from the University of Colorado, Boulder. Adam spent 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow in the philosophy department at the University of Twente, the Netherlands. His interdisciplinary research lies at the intersections of science, technology, ethics, and politics. He is the author of several books, including A Field Philosopher's Guide to Fracking and Thinking Through Climate Change, A Philosophy of Energy in the Anthropocene. He is also active in the Public Philosophy Network, which seeks to advance the theory and practice of philosophy that engages with society. His most recent book, A Field Guide to Climate Change, Understanding the Problems, which is completely fresh, 2024, deals with the issue of climate literacy and provides a guide for understanding how problems related to climate change are framed, debated, and resolved. His talk in the Energy Ethics Workshop now will deal with the ethics of energy policy in the United States. So please, Adam.
Okay, is this working? You can hear me okay? All right. I'm starting a timer, so I'll keep myself hopefully in check. Thank you to Rafaela and Gio and everybody here. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here, to be invited. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to start with some preliminaries here, and then we'll get into my kind of thesis. So I always think of energy as a paradox, the ever-changing sameness. I chose the title for this talk of Driven because I like that it captures two opposite meanings. You can be driven as in you're autonomously motivated to do something, but you can also be driven as in like the cattle are driven across the plains, right? So there's a heteronomous and an autonomous aspect. We drive our cars. That's the typical American example. But the cars, in a way, also drive us, right? We're not entirely in control of them. So keep that in mind. That's just a kind of vibe I'm getting at. The other preliminary is that there is no such thing as U.S. energy policy, of course, because you're talking about millions of decisions across different scales of government and private sector and all of that. So when Gio asked me to do this, I had a choice. I could either step back and try to say something broadly about the whole conglomerate of energy policies, or I could just pick something. I decided to sort of step back and try to give a big theory, but I also have a case study that I'll use. And then the last thing, is that coming up right? Yeah, okay. I studied policy in grad school, and so my understanding of policy is that it's a social process of authoritative decision-making through which members of a community who often disagree, that's the key part, right? Blue skies, heat in your home, how they clarify and secure their common interests. So this idea of a common good or common interest is another really important theme. I think that's how policy is different from politics. Okay, so those are my preliminaries. Now, here's my outline. I have a two-part theory that I want to develop around a real politic of energy. I'm interested in, there was an ethical turn towards technology. I'm interested in a political turn, thinking about technology and ethics. Then I'm going to dump into a case study. Then I have a second part to the theory, borrowing from Bruno Latour in his actor-actant network. And then I have one slide to conclude on where the U.S. stands now on my case study, which is about decarbonization or the energy transition. So it's basically I'm trying to develop a theory and apply it to what I think is probably the most important energy issue, which is decarbonizing the U.S. economy. It's in itself, of course, a bundle of millions of policies. Okay, so here is my thesis. That we can understand U.S. energy policies as trials of strength between competing imperatives that take shape as actor-actant networks. That's what I'm going to try to argue for. And so if you're in the policy world, the key to success is alignment, or Latour might say, ally-ment. You have to enroll allies to your cause. So you have to get alignment of imperatives to win the tug of war. That's going to be my thesis. So let's jump into it. Realpolitik. I have A definition here, a system of politics based on practical rather than moral considerations. It's a good working definition. You could also think about Langdon Winner here. I know most people are familiar with that article, Do Artifacts Have Politics? Winner in there has this nice concept of the moral claims of practical necessity. So you can also think about these practical imperatives as themselves a kind of overriding morality. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of this term. It's actually, I want to talk about two instances of realpolitik before the letter, as it were, because that term was coined in the 19th century here in Germany. The first is Thucydides' dialogue, the Melian dialogue. And there you see the Athenians attacking the poor little Melians on their island. And the famous quote from that dialogue is, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." But notice how even the strong here are compelled. They do what they can, but it has that double sense of, we kind of have to do what we can. And they dominate because they risk appearing weak if they don't. There's another key line from that dialogue. The Athenians say, "Of the gods we believe, and of men we know, that by a necessary law of their nature they rule wherever they can. All we do is make use of it, knowing that you and everybody else having the same power as we have would do the same as we do." Right? So they're implementing this law, but also it's implementing them, right? They're not entirely in control of it. Anybody would do this. There's a neat connection to this the idea of an energy imperative from a scholar, Uberholde, back in the 1950s, who wrote, "A Robinson Crusoe suddenly abandoned now on a desert island would experience much the same sequence of ideas about how to subjugate the world around him as did the original." So there's this idea of an imperative that kind of just works through us in the way an electric current might work through a wire or something. But let me complicate that with Machiavelli. This is where I really get inspired, because I think Machiavelli, we can say, might like this idea of an energy or power imperative, but note that it's not singular. There's not just one, there's many. There's many clashing imperatives. And in fact, what we can take as the common good or the common interest is just the outcome or the, let's say, dynamic equilibrium, the tension between all of these warring, competing factions within a society. And a really strong society is one where they're all strongly pushing against each other, as opposed to a kind of pre-modern sense of the common good that might be about harmonizing, finding some grand synthesizing harmony. This is more about interests clashing. Now, Machiavelli's really interesting on virtue and ethics. He says, a nation must recognize different kinds of virtues. It's a mistake to praise the good in absolute terms. What is good to do in normal circumstances is not always the best thing to do. Those normal times are made possible by extraordinary occasions. And so to be good in ordinary times, you have to be aware that at some times, from that point of view, you have to be bad. Okay? There's a certain badness that you have to be good at doing in certain times, right? And the truly virtuous person, the truly wise and virtuous person, knows when to deploy these different moralities, right? And that would make you truly virtuous as opposed to merely good but naive or utopian, right? I think that's interesting. And then let's connect this to energy. I think that this notion of virtue is the modern notion of energy, in a way. The birth of modern energy, for me, comes out of Machiavelli, that nature is not a divine order of the biblical God that we're supposed to receive passively, lest we risk sinfully overstepping our bounds hubristically. Rather, Fortuna is a goddess like a violent river, endangering humanity. And if we have virtue, if we're not so lazy, right, we can tame that wild river and conquer chance and destiny. Because what we really want, if we take humans as they really are, is we want earthly goods here on this earth, right? We don't want a nice afterlife. Okay, now let me summarize all that, and then we'll get to my case study. What I take from it, There are imperatives at work in politics that compel both the weak and the strong to do things they might not want to do. That is, from some aspects of their moral codes, some of their moral ledgers, they're always kind of violating, in a way, their own morality with another aspect of their morality. The imperatives are these conflicting moralities that clash within societies, but also between them. Modern politics, I think, understands the common good as this dynamic equilibrium between these contesting imperatives. And then the last thing, I think modern energy is a paradigmatic case. Because imagine you have this foregrounded world of convenient consumption. I'm just borrowing from Albert Borgman here, right? And there's a nice sort of morality to that. But this world, you know, is made possible by a backgrounded world of kind of brute force that may be governed by an entirely different morality. So you may be like, I drive my Chevy Volt, which is a nice electric car, and I can feel good about the morality of not contributing to air pollution in the DFW Metroplex, which isn't as bad as Beijing, but has its problems. But you also know behind that car, or built into that car, is slave labor in the Congo, say, mining for the materials, right? So there is a kind of hypocrisy that I think becomes paradigmatic for this moral life. Okay, now, let's look at US energy policy. I think I can make this more clear if we bring it to a case study. All right. Here it is. Here's US energy in one slide. I love these Sankey diagrams because you can say, take a country, and in one glimpse, you can look at what's it doing with energy. So you can see kind of at a snapshot a couple of things. A strong fossil fuel base, about 80%. The main use sectors there, transportation, industry, commercial, residential. You can see electricity, which is a secondary fuel, right? And where that goes. The other thing to point out is just how incredibly inefficient the energy system is. So you can see over there where it's, what does it say? Rejected energy is simply waste, right? So 2/3 of the entire energy doesn't go to a useful end. It's the other 33 that goes to energy services. I have another graph, because that one's a little much. This is kind of nice too. It's similar information. So at a glance, you can see in the US, petroleum, natural gas, and coal are still dominant. And renewables are coming online. So, and then this at the bottom shows you what sectors those energies used in. It's almost electric power, transportation, industry, almost 3/4, and then the rest you have residential, commercial buildings. Okay, but my case study that I want to talk about was decarbonizing, right? So the greenhouse gas emissions from all of that energy, let's look at that as a case study about these imperatives, okay? Here you can see the US. I noticed Germany's not on here, sorry. It's not labeled anyways. China is there. The size of the dot is population size. On the x-axis, you have GDP, and then you've got it through per capita or CO2 emissions, right? So the whole idea, and I wish I knew the term implementation gap, because that's what I'm going to talk about, right? Now I know that term, is that the US has this policy to drive emissions down, but we're not doing it. But let me show you this. This is a graph one of my mentors, Roger Pilkey, put together. Just look at the rate of decarbonization of different countries. So all these countries have signed on to, let's say, the Paris Accord. They've all agreed through their nationally determined contributions to bring down their emissions, right? None of them are really doing it as quick as the ambitious targets would have us. But the US actually is outperforming the world average on this. We're not doing great, but better than most, you could say. It is still too slow, right? Why, and this gets to you asked, why are the policies failing, right? This implementation gap. That's what I want to get at too. Look at this. I love this graph. It shows you from our founding, when we were a wood and muscle-powered nation, to where we are now. What's really interesting, does this have a little light on it? Is that the top button? No light on it. Okay. Well, I can just describe. You see the black line of coal dipping down and the blue line of gas going up. That's been the biggest energy shift we've seen, which is our own kind of coal to gas switch. But we still have, the point is, this is the same information in a different form, kind of zoomed in. We still have a stubborn fossil fuel base, about 80% of our total energy. And although we're growing renewables like crazy, that growth is all additive, right? It's not displacing the fossil base, right? And now if you look at the rise of data centers and AI and crypto mining, it just looks like we're going to keep gas and coal plants online longer than we thought. So here's the implementation gap, right? If we're going to achieve our decarbonization goals, we'd have to hit that red line in terms of annual rate of decarbonization. Something like, what, 8%? But we're running at about a 2 or 3%. So, can I get a water? That's better. Okay, so why? Why so slow? Let me give you the usual story. Politics, okay? I like that title. Barriers are more political than technical. So the usual story is, yes, Adam, there is a clash between moralities or imperatives, and the clash is binary. It's Democrats and Republicans, right? There's two partisan codes of values, and it's true. In our country, one party denies the reality of climate change. Okay? It's kind of, I don't know how to put it more starkly, but they're led by somebody who called it a Chinese hoax, right? The other party really takes it seriously as a part of their platform, okay? So there is some truth to this, and the election will matter, okay? But it's not the only thing going on, okay? In this, I have a series of slides I want to show you. It almost actually doesn't matter who's in charge of the federal government. I mean, it does, but not as big as you think. Look at this graph. This is oil production. So, blue stands for the Democrats, who are supposed to be climate friendly, right? Oil hit a new high under the Biden administration. Natural gas, same thing, right? Now flip it. Look at renewables. Maybe I will walk around, Gio. You said I would. So will this be on? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay. Texas leads renewables, right? But Texas is full of politicians, controlled by politicians, who hate renewables, right? So what's going on? Here's the deal. We're getting decoupling, okay? But just not at the rate. I need to sit down. That's too formal to stand. We're getting decoupling, but just not at the rate that we wanted it, right? So, and then look at this top graph. It's steadily about 2% decarbonization. And then notice, it doesn't matter what presidential administration is in power. It's the same 2%. What's really interesting is, during the Clinton administration, there was a BTU tax proposed that was killed by the Republicans. Then during Obama's administration, there was a cap and trade policy bill that was killed by the Republicans. But we've actually beat our emissions targets under that cap and trade bill, even though it never got passed. Trump pulled us out of the Paris Agreement, but still our emissions are lower than they were pre-pandemic. So the point is there's some other non-federal partisan imperatives pushing this stuff, right? It's not going as fast as the Democrats want it to go, but even when the Republicans are in charge, it still happens. That is decarbonization, right? Okay, so let me put this up here. Oh, one more. So here's my take on it, and then I'm going to get to Latour. Is that slow decline, 2%, right? On a graph, it would look like this, very slow. But in reality, it's all of these imperatives pushing and pulling, right? Tugging at it. Some wanting to go faster, some wanting to go slower. And we're just seeing the result of that. So it looks like a smooth 2% decline, but it's actually a chaotic, what Latour called full of detours, right, back and forth. Now, I'll give you an example. So from where I live in Texas, it's very hard to take public transportation. We just don't have much of a network for it. And so I drive my car. I feel bad about it, but I kind of have to, right? And what I realized actually as I was preparing this talk is that's not really a decision I made, right? I mean, I did, but I made it with the neighborhood. And I mean the built neighborhood, right? It's just the way my neighborhood is built. It kind of decided for me, you know? This is what you're gonna do. It's true, I could walk to the nearest bus stop and wait in the blazing hot sun, and it would add 2 hours to my otherwise 15-minute commute. But I'm not gonna do that, right? So this gets to Latour. So I think, here's my little graphic version of it. Think about energy policies, even on the individual level, like me deciding to drive the car, or the federal level, and everything in between, as this kind of zone of contention, or a scrum, if you like rugby metaphors, okay? These clashes and forces coming together, right? And some of them are pushing this way and some are pushing that way. Now, we have this goal. We want to be net zero by 2050, decarbonize. How do you get the common interest scrum to move over to that goal, right? In a non-authoritarian regime. I think that Xi has a pretty good idea how to do this. This is where the comparison is really interesting, because there would be one really big arrow, right, in China maybe. But in my context, we don't really have that. I think the key is alignment. So if you've got, sorry, some arrows are pointing away from it, if you could turn those around, right? That's the key to policy success. Or what I call, you've heard the concept enabling constraints? Somebody said, was it Spielberg who made Jaws? I don't know, but the movie Jaws, he couldn't use a mechanical shark for that movie. I don't know why, but there were some constraints. So he had to come up with something else, and it was actually much better. So the constraint actually led to a better outcome. So the key to decarbonizing is to align these imperatives, which are otherwise a constraint, and so I call it kind of enabling the constraint, right? To turn it to your advantage. That's the Machiavellian sort of virtue ethic of this, is to make a good out of a bad, maybe, something like that, right? The other thing, this is kind of a side note. Oh gosh, I went the wrong way. I think this is, I realize I'm kind of redescribing the tragedy of the commons in a way, Because if you put yourself as an individual or as a city or even as a nation in the context of climate change as a global problem, you're asking yourself, why would I sacrifice for the greater good when my little sacrifice won't achieve the common good, right? Why I work with the city of Denton on a climate action plan, and it makes no sense for the city of Denton to reduce its GDP and its economy to achieve climate goals when even if Denton goes net zero in 2050, it won't make a difference, right? You can scale that up. The US is really only 4% of emissions, right? So the whole country could do it, but it wouldn't make a difference, right? So what's in it for me, right? In other words, as Machiavelli or Garrett Hardin would say, what makes me not the fool, the naive fool? How can I be virtuous in the sense of being good at being bad, right? I think that that's the key for me to this political turn in politics and energy. Now, I'm at 24 minutes. That's pretty good. Latour. So this is kind of a half-baked theory, okay? I'm thinking about this. I could use your help. But it occurred to me the imperatives at work are too abstract. How do they take shape? And I think they take shape, obviously, in what humans are doing, but more than that, too. And so the second part of my theory is about how the imperatives show up in the world as networks of allies competing with each other. And so in the energy world, I think you have human actors. I'll go through these kind of quick. This is the part I'm a little sketchy on, but I think it could be interesting. We've already talked about the politics, the interest groups, the NIMBYs, the YIMBYs, the ExxonMobil, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, you name it, the stuff that always gets talked about in a political way. But you also have economics, what Roger Pilkey called the iron law of economics. Anytime a climate policy goes up against economic growth will win every time, okay? So that's the enabling constraint in his mind that you have to work with. All right? But you also have R&D, engineering R&D, and I mean both in the energy sector, like, got my examples here, fracking and solar power, but also in other sectors. The development of AI becomes a kind of juggernaut in its own right, you know. It's so strong that nobody said we can't do AI because of the energy consumption, right? It's more like AI gets done and then, oh, we have to figure out how to feed the beast, right? So there's this other kind of imperative at work. And then maybe the, the most important is security or availability. It's just amazing the people in Hubei, the province leader said, I'm willing to sacrifice for the greater good. Because I think that's really the exception that proves the rule, that generally having the lights on all the time, a reliable, secure source of energy is an extremely strong imperative, right? Langdon Winter said, democracy is nice, but that's no way to run a railroad. It's kind of like net zero is nice, but it's no way to run an economy, right? It's no way to win an arms race, and it's no way to win a profit race, unless you can make it a way to win a profit race or arm race. But those set the terms, right? The terms are dictated by these other imperatives. And your climate goal is going to have to find a way to make those into allies rather than enemies. So you have the human world, and then you've got these non-human actants. And here I was just getting a little silly with my names. Stages. So where are things located? Where is the cobalt? Who has geothermal? It might be easier for Iceland to go net zero just because they're sitting on a gold mine of geothermal, right? That becomes an actant that determines the outcome of those policies. How deep is the gas? How sunny is it? Texas leads in renewables, not because political will, it's just there's a lot of sun. And Texas has a grid that is the most free market in the country, and that grid really incentivizes zero-cost fuels on it, right? So the market conditions are right for it. So the stage is set, as it were. Also, there's there's lithium mining in Nevada. There's a proposed lithium mine, but there's an endangered flower on the lithium mine. And so that becomes an actant, right? Who has his own or their own allies that are enrolled in a sort of clash. And it'll be interesting to see how powerful is this flower, right? Will it stop an entire lithium mine? The other thing I came up with, so scripts, those are the properties. Václav Smil, who I think is probably the best energy analyst that I know of, he says the energy transition is going to take a lot longer than people think, simply because fossil fuels are really power dense. You know, they're a really good source of fuel, and we've built a lot of stuff around it. Oh, by the way, also the stage. The stage would be what I would call path dependencies, right? I have a kind of benevolent bombing of DFW theory. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is so screwed up, it's so car-centric, that the best policy, maybe Xi could pull this off, would be to clear everybody out and just bomb it and then start over, right? But you can't do that because there's all that stuff as an actant sort of that's been delegated by prior decision makers who are no longer here saying this is the way it must be, right? So that's a force in its own right, you know? And then you have these scripts. So the fossil fuel is very power dense. It has that going for it. Solar and wind is a zero-cost fuel once it's up and going, right? So that's kind of a strength it brings. You could talk about batteries. Batteries in a Latourian sense would be really interesting to unpack it and see all the different properties they have and the ways you can change it to a solid-state battery or something. And so the engineers in the human world are working with these batteries to try to find the ally to win this contest that they're in, right? Then the last one I had is what I'm calling costumes. So these actants, how do they show up or how do they appear in the world? What footprint does it have? How does it pattern land use? How does it behave on the stage or improvise? What unintended consequences does it have, right? What risks does it create? And how are those interpreted by the audience as we're watching this actor perform, right? So now you have imperatives taking shape as these actor-acting networks, pushing and pulling in search of the common interest, which is really an ongoing process of dynamic equilibrium. That's my theory of energy policy, okay, on a grand scale. Now I'm doing good on time, 31 minutes here, because I've got 2 more slides to kind of wrap this up. The first one is let's go back to the case study now. Climate change, decarbonization, energy transition. The climate is a weak actor or actant or actor-actant network, right, in itself. In fact, the climate doesn't even really exist. You know, it's a kind of construct. There's weather, okay, but the climate's not here. If you want, you could use Timothy Morton's, what is that, hyperobject theory for this. It's sort of massively distributed. And again, going back to energy as a paradox, that means the climate is always here and never here, right? It's all over you, but it's not present at all, right? So that makes it extremely weak. And it keeps falling down the list of priorities when it comes to these actor-actant networks, right? It is something that needs allies. I'll give you some more data from the US. You ask Americans, how much are you willing to pay in higher electric bills to combat climate change? And if you get up to $10 a month, they're off, right? So Americans are not willing to pay a lot for climate change, right? It's just not a high priority issue, honestly. It's weird because I would say our Republican leaders are, many of them, hardcore climate denialists, but actually I think most Americans, if you look at like the Yale Communication Group has a good data on this, most Americans accept the reality of anthropogenic climate change. So the consensus is actually fairly broad. It's just very shallow, right? It's just, this is not a big issue for me. It's not something I'm going to really spend a lot of money on. And then this was a survey of young voters in America. What do you care about? What are the issues in this election coming up? And you see inflation and jobs in the economy and healthcare are all up there very high. And climate change is way down here, right? Climate change in the environment. In fact, oil and gas exploration is sort of close to climate change in the environment, right? So there's a lot made of, well, the younger generation really cares about this, but they care what everybody cares about. They want to have health care, and they want to have a place to live, and they want to have a job, right? If climate can go along with that stuff, great. But if it's a matter of a trade-off, well, we know which arrow is going to be stronger than the other one, right? So I think, this is my last slide here, I think the US government has finally figured this out. And they're trying something new, which I would just call, or other people are calling industrial policy, right? Or green growth. They're trying for maximal alignment. So what's happening now in the US is a big shift to industrial policy. What does that mean? There's a paradigm shift here. It used to be that carbon pricing was central to our policies around climate change, the kind of stick, in other words, punish the carbon producers. But we saw with the cap and trade bill and with BTU tax that didn't work. And so we shifted to the carrot. Okay. The carrot is give money and other incentives, tax breaks, regulatory breaks to green energy industries, right? That's the big move. Joe Biden loves saying, if you watch him talk about climate change, he'll get up there and say, when I think about climate change, I think about jobs. No fooling, he'll say. No fooling, jobs. That's my Joe Biden voice for you. Some people call this, there's a really smart climate analyst named Robinson Meyer who writes for The Atlantic. He calls this the green vortex. It's a virtuous cycle. So your policy speeds up development of your preferred industries, right? So your green industries. You speed that up, it makes the green technologies cheaper, which means more companies adopt them, which means they're more amenable to climate policies that favor their bottom line, which means coalitions shift and you bring government, corporations, and labor into alignment or allyment, right? And this green vortex is now our thinking about how we're going to accelerate and close that implementation gap by bringing in these allies. But like I said, the other way to see it is the hegemony of green growth. Like, if we're going to solve the climate, it has to be in a way that goes with the iron law of economic growth, right? That's the only way it's going to work. Oh, I forgot. I'll go back. Maybe, right? The other thing I forgot, I dare not go back. Can I go back, or is it going to screw up anything? Oh, I can go back if I hit this button. I have a little bit of time. This bottom thing here. How do you make the climate stronger? Okay. One, a medium-scale catastrophe that hits rich people. That's really important, right? It's already hitting poor people. But if something happens to wealthy people that punches them in the face, it makes the climate a much stronger actor-actant network, right? So that's one possibility, the kind of medium-scale disaster thing. The other, this is from Dupuy. Carl, you put me in touch with it. Remember the Enlightened Doomsaying article, really interesting. Or Hans Jonas even. You could try to have a new conception of the future where the catastrophe is already here so that future generations and the climate becomes heavier for you. The other one, this is what the US is opting for now, is you find stronger allies, right? So you find a way to move the scrum. That's why I'm talking about this green vortex. So it will be green growth. Here are the dangers, last 2 points. There's a danger of greenwashing because, for example, now you talk about jobs and economic growth. One way to do that would be carbon capture and sequestration. Could be a great economic opportunity, and this is starting to happen in the US. But is that really going to solve the problem? Or are we just creating more jobs for the oil and gas industry, right? So there's an easy way to co-opt this framing, I think, so that it looks like you're pushing towards your goal, but actually you're just sort of sustaining the status quo, right? So that's one of the dangers. And then if you ask me where this is going to go with, let's say, if Trump were to win the election, part of my thesis is it won't really matter, right? Oh, but that's too strong. It won't matter as much as you think. I think it will matter because I do think Trump wants to kill this industrial policy, right? He wants to cut back on incentives for electric vehicles and wind and solar power. So that will have real consequences, right? I can't deny that. But also, people even in red districts, so Republican districts, are getting a lot of money to make green technologies in their districts, okay? People like money, and politicians like to take credit for giving money out. And so once you get this green vortex rolling and you get a green industry going and that's where the jobs are coming from in your community, it's harder for a politician to come in and say, I think climate change is a hoax, so I'm going to kill your community by destroying this factory that's making batteries or whatever, right? So I think that it's a smart policy to set this up because you're making a stronger network that's pushing against even an ideological opposition from the political world, right? So I think we'll just have to see. But if you ask me, where's the U.S. going? It's towards this industrial policy, and it'll be really interesting to see how the forces push and pull now that this new sort of chess match has been set in the country. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, now we have a chance to ask Adam our questions. So please. Okay, let's do it geographically, like you first. And then.
Oh, thank you very much for this amazing talk. I'm actually thinking the US case are just the opposite of the Chinese case. Can I use the word liberal environmentalism to describe the...
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and then to use the incentive and the carrots instead of the sticks. Because China used to use it. Before, maybe 2 decades ago, use more of the carrots, but now switch to the sticks. And then US actually exactly did the opposite. So yeah, I'm actually curious, like what's the rational drive behind this shift?
Okay,
This is a
good.
very broad question.
Americans don't like to spend more money on gasoline, and I think. So what's happened is if you try to use the stick, even if it is a even if it's some sort of cap and trade scheme or carbon tax where you generate revenue, you're still going to see a higher sticker price at the pump, right? Because you're taxing the carbon. And that right there becomes like a phenomenological political showstopper in our country, I would say. Other Americans might disagree. But we have the most insane, stupid debates about who are you going to vote for? And it's kind of like, well, I don't know, gas is pretty high, so I don't know about this politician. Right? So it just hasn't worked because we don't like taxes. I mean, our whole country was kind of founded on that, so... Yeah. Carl?
Thank you again for a great talk. Is this working?
Yeah.
It is? Okay. You open up so many questions and so many ideas that I'm sort of overwhelmed here, but we'll find time to talk about more of them. But to be more focused, what you don't mention in your sort of analysis of the Latourian analysis is social movements. And I sort of don't like Latour. I think he's very French, and he thinks that this is all done by intellectuals. But if you look at changes that have taken place, real changes, they've been grounded in social movements, like the labor movement, or like the environmental movement, or the anti-nuclear movement, right? And these are movements that were created in the face of hyperobjects that you didn't really see. Capitalism. Capitalism is a hyperobject. The labor movement was able to criticize capitalism and reacted and transformed capitalism by having some social glue to create a solidarity among people who were willing to sacrifice. I'm going to go out on strike even if I lose my job, right? Because it's for the good of the movement. Joe Hill, dying on, being executed, says, "Don't mourn, organize," right? And that generated social glue in the labor movement. Now, it was undercut over time. But another one is the anti-nuclear movement, led by like a doctor, what was his, Spock was his name, right? A pediatrician, and allied with, I guess, and then you could put it in Latourian terms, scientists who were upset by what had happened with nuclear weapons and but nuclear catastrophe is another hyperobject. It's out there, but it's not here. So there we get, Jean-Pierre's notion of doomsaying, bringing the doom here. So I guess that's
good.
Sort of proposal, that something else that needs to be considered, social movements and how they work, and look at the ones that have been successful and why they're successful.
I take you. Yeah, thank you. I could have put social movements, I think, under politics. I guess I was grouping it under interest groups, but you're right to point out that they have been really much more important drivers than an afterthought. So yeah, good point.
Thank you for your talk. That was absolutely excellent. And there's a lot that I will have to digest. And I don't come from a politics background at all. So forgive me if I ask inappropriate questions. But I come from a design background, and in design we very strongly believe that we need to co-develop the solutions with our users. And for you, the public and the people are very much portrayed as their only agency is voting. But of course they can influence the system. We can design new energy systems with them, new traffic systems. We can involve them in all of that process. And it's not in the sense of a movement, which then becomes organized, but in a sense of an individual that is empowered to make their own choices for a greater good, if one convinces them that their interest is aligned with overall energy policy. But there is an agency of the individual, which I think you're overlooking. And the other thing that struck me is that you're also missing, in a way, in this analysis, the agency of the non-governmental actors, whether that's, for example, big industrial companies that I think are actually quite moral in trying to bring forwards change. In some cases, Europeans have a much more benign view on their industry than I think Americans have. But also players like insurance companies that are shaping things enormously. What I can't reinsure, I can't insure, and what I can't insure, I can't build. Therefore, they push things in different directions, and I think there are other actors and other means of influencing that system.
I mean, I agree. I think both of these comments I take in the spirit of this framework actually works. You're just overlooking maybe some important actors in the network. The insurance is really important. I thought about including that. In Texas, California, and Florida, it's getting to the point where you can't get homes insured in certain areas, or Louisiana, because of climate impacts, largely. So there's a really interesting case where the climate is becoming a kind of actor in its own right, pushing on the insurance sector, which then pushes on other policy levers, right? So yeah, I agree. I don't think I ignored individuals. I think we might have different senses of how much agency they really have, but that's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this fascinating talk. I was wondering, you talked about the allies of climate, and I was wondering, I mean, there seem to be very natural allies we heard about in the first talk. I mean, the blue skies, wherever they are, and much more immediate benefits. And I mean, it's something maybe about, you talked a lot about, which gave me a lot of insights into American culture, but which I still don't understand, and it sort of ties back to Claudia's first question. What is so difficult? I find it easier to understand with somebody who's suffering from the cold and has immediate dangers of suffocating from it, of dying from it, doesn't want to see climate change as an issue. But I don't see why you don't see the immediate benefits in the Western world of having less cars, less exhaust fumes. I find this really difficult, and that's also where this agency comes in. That is apparently not taken as much as it could have been taken or can be taken.
Yeah, thanks. And this gives me a chance. Something I kind of skipped over because we're running out of time, but I'll give you an example. I'm on this climate. I'm on an environmental committee at the city of Denton, where I live, that's just passed a climate action plan. And so we've established a goal of net zero by 2050 for our city. And when it came up to city council's first question was, is this a recommendation? Or are we going to have to like make policies that will impact people's lives, right? And we thought about that and we said, well, we're just kind of, this is a ambitious goal, right? And then the whole conversation became one of alignment. We went to all of the other plans that council has already approved, like clean air, clean water, sustainable housing, and we said, this is how the goal would come up. We would get cleaner air. So don't think about the climate, but we would have cleaner air, right? Don't think about the climate, we would have more energy efficient buildings so our low-income communities don't spend so much on energy. So all the co-benefits become the allies for climate. That's true. That's the only way you could sell it, right? The big gorilla for us is transportation. And like I said, it's a behemoth in its own right. And honestly, when you sit there, it's so different. But if you sit there in Texas and you look at our infrastructure, you think, really our only hope here is electric vehicles, right? It's the politics of it. We're not going to get more public support for busing. We're not going to get a rail line. So people are still going to have cars. We're just going to have to hope that they get electric cars. But then the city has really very little power over that, right? So you're right. The co-benefits are there, but they only go so far to move the needle or the scrum.
We have time for the last. Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. I take away some sort of an optimistic lesson from this, so that something can be achieved, and I'm very grateful for that. But I want to ask another question to bring some pessimism into this. So I agree with the analysis that there's some sort of so populist politicians will somehow ignore the lesson that the way we're consuming energy, it's not a free lunch. There's going to be some cost, and then populism sort of says, well, let's have that lunch first, and then we'll see about paying for it. And now you're offering, the way I understand it, an idea of, well, maybe we could have a different lunch that's more appealing, you know, by having sort of carrots instead of the sticks. And so so the idea is, well, we could have that different lunch and it would be net zero carbon emissions. But the next question, of course, would be, would that be a sustainable way of ensuring net zero carbon emissions with a lifestyle that would work for billions of people, right? Because why would the rest of the world look at, you know, the enormous resources that have to be procured to sustain a net zero emission lifestyle as it is lived in Europe and the United States right now? So my question is, you know, won't we have to come to a point where we have to tell people, or we have to make people understand that you know, if we look at it globally, even if we go to net zero emissions, that's not a sustainable lifestyle, you know, because, you know, there's no way we're going to make electric vehicles for a global population, right? So won't there be sort of that, you know, that have to be that party that will not win elections because they're going to have to tell people we're not going to be able to live that way? Or do you have so my hope is that you have a positive or more appealing answer than mine to that.
No, I don't. I mean, you framed it globally, where there's no global government. So, I mean, the U.S. isn't going to tell the Congo directly what to do. It may, in terms of other coercive measures, and it already does, interfere in what's going there. So you, I think, nailed it when you said the party that's not going to win, that tells us to reduce our standard of living, right? It's true. Our standard of living is crazy because we consume way more than we need to be happy with. But I guess I am a pessimist on that. I don't see any way anybody's going to win on that platform in a liberal democracy, which is not most of the world. So you could have other regimes that do that and they sustain their legitimacy. So then I think you're back to my choices. You either align with the imperatives of a capitalist liberal democracy, or the climate comes and punches you in the face. And then it's sort of a necessity, because that's become such a strong push that you can't, I like your metaphor, you can't kick it down the line. Like the bill has come due immediately. I think that's the only situation where that's going to happen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our last expert speaker for this energy ethics workshop, a person who I'm sure most of you know very well, Professor Raffaella Hillerbrand. She's currently professor at the KIT Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, where she leads the research group ITAS, the short form of Philosophy of Engineering, Technology Assessment and Science. And she is also the head of the Academy for Responsible Research, Teaching and Innovation, ARTI. Raffaella Hillerbrand holds not just one, but two PhDs, one in theoretical physics from the Westfälische Wilhelms-Universität Münster, and another in philosophy from the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität Erlangen. Before joining at KIT, she held a position as Senior Research Fellow at the University of Oxford and professorships at the TU Delft University and Aachen University. She's made a big impact in fields like ethics in technology, sustainability, and risk theory, particularly connecting scientific innovations with ethical responsibility. And in all these topics, she has published extensively. Today, she will deal with the ethics of energy policy in Germany and the broader context of Europe. Please join me in welcoming Professor Raffaella Hillerbrand.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Noemi, for this wonderful introduction. And thanks all of you for being here. And thanks to Giovanni for organizing this workshop. I enjoyed it tremendously this morning. When Giovanni asked me to give a talk on Germany's energy system, I felt honored. But at the same time, it felt like squaring the circle because I didn't know where to start and where to zoom in. But Giovanni corrected me. It felt like squaring the circle, not with what he gave to me, but what I made out of it. So I think it will be very different from Adam's talk we just heard now. I will zoom in really into some of the nitty-gritty details and then have philosophical thoughts like some flashes on the side. So no full-blown philosophical argument, just some thoughts. And I thought I delve into two of the peculiarities of the German energy system, also go a bit into the history of it. But before, I thought it might be nice to see where we are standing today. I'm sorry, I took these internet shots from the Agora web page this morning around 11, so I only have the data how the energy mix of electricity looked today. So what you see in gray is we still have a lot of conventional coal and gas. You see the day coming around 6 o'clock. So the yellow one is the photovoltaic, is the solar energy, and we have a base of biofuels waste on and offshore wind energy. So the dark one, the constant one, is the offshore wind energy, and you see that this day is rather typical. You see on the right-hand side, the same electricity production in Germany over the week. You see exactly when the weather got better. On Tuesday, the weather got better. We have more solar. And you also see that quite for sometimes we had, that's the pink line, we had more electricity consumption than we actually produced in the country. But yeah, that's sort of typical. And here you also see, what you see is sort of also what has been typical for the last few years. So the orange and the blue one on the picture here are what was gray on the last slide. So these are the fossil fuels and contribution to others. You also see on the right-hand side how all of these fuels contribute to CO2 emissions. That's something we will focus on a lot in the following. And maybe just one thing already now to mention, what is peculiar about Germany, I don't delve into it much further, is that we have a lot of lignite, Braunkohle. We don't only have hard coal, but we have lignite, and this is particularly astonishing because it, of course, has not only big impacts on CO2 emissions, especially methane emissions, methane being a really, really strong greenhouse gas, but open-cast lignite mining has altered almost 180,000 hectares of countryside in Germany in the 20th and 21st century, and since 1924, 313 settlements, which are mainly small villages, have been lost, mainly in the close to the Ruhr area and in eastern Germany. So the peculiarities I thought that the German energy system has and always had over the history are the first and the last point. I think it stands to the civil use of nuclear power, and I want to dive a bit into the history of that. And the last point, that Germany was strong in renewable energies very early onwards, and unfortunately quite, I would say 2 decades ago, lost the momentum and went from a leadership in climate mitigation to whatever, but certainly not a leader anymore. And that's frustrating to a lot of people, not only in Germany, but also worldwide. And another peculiarity is in the middle. So we have certain boundary conditions and constraints, one coming from the large. We are part of the EU, and the EU has a policy on energy, which is partly binding for all member states. And Germany has, like the US, a very strong federal structure, which comes with its own challenges. And what you see in green, I want to sort of give you some insights into philosophical, or at least science and technology reflective disciplines on the side. And coming from a risk discourse, my first comment will be on how our risk discourse is not adequate to deal with energy. Some caveats to start with. I start somewhere. I mean, no matter when you talk about energy, you cannot touch everything. I take it as a starting point that the driving force of current European energy policies is, particularly in Germany, but also worldwide, is climate change and the finiteness of fossil fuels. I focus not on energy as a virtue or anything, I focus very much on electricity. And I do think that is a good thing. It gives a good starting point because you see that in many countries, including Germany, a lot of things which were warmth and transport sector, they will all get electrified. So where we get our electricity from is going to be more and more important. And my basic framework is a risk framework. And I take risk as multidimensional. It's not only harm to human beings, it could be harm to the environment, it could be anything. Just a reminder for all of you, it's nothing new to you, so I take as a starting point, risk is something that is also an empirical concept, how uncertain a harm is, but it's certainly always also a normative concept, because what harm is and what constitutes a harm, we also need to have some normative conception about that. So no matter what technocrats say who work on risk or used to work on risk, risk is in its core a normative concept, or as we philosophers would put it, a thick concept, because it entails normative and descriptive elements. And note maybe I'm not using risk as probability times harm. It's a bit, as this is a bit more open, but this could be one way of filling in this definition. Actually, the risk discourse started with nuclear power somewhere in the 1950s, and started with a hardcore scientific concept where people were a little bit oblivious or ignoring that it has the societal component or this normative component that changed already in the 1960s, I think, with the seminal paper of Starr, where for the first time we talked about, or he talked about, acceptable risks. And don't worry, I'm not going through this. I think this is some of the highlights of the social science risk analysis over the last decades. And I will delve into one of these theories later. And just to mention that at least analytic philosophy of technology only took part in this discourse rather late, and it actually started with Sven Ove Hansen, who is not an aestheticist, but actually a logician, in the 1990s. Of course, also Foucault and other philosophers were talking about risk before, but that's the analytic philosophical discourse, where some of you are also contributing to. So far for the concept of risk, but let's now delve really into the nuclear history of Germany. And that started very late, and there are three focal points I have at the beginning on this timeline. The Green Party was founded in 1980 and had from the beginning a strong focus, a strong anti-nuclear movement. But what is peculiar then, after the accident in Chernobyl being not too far away from Germany, but actually having no significant impact, meaning we had never had radiation above a certain threshold that is deemed dangerous. The Social Democratic Party, one of the two center parties, went from pro-nuclear to anti-nuclear. So that was the first step here, and go through it. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. That was to be expected. So now going to the Green Party, which was actually founded close to here, which was founded in Karlsruhe, not too far away from here. The Chernobyl disaster, after that the SPD, the Social Democrats, turned away from nuclear power. And after the accident in Fukushima, which had actually no impact on Germany, no physical impact on Germany, at least the leader of the Christian Democratic Party turned against nuclear, and that was the beginning of the phase out. But already from the start, the history of nuclear is rather peculiar, maybe. It started like everywhere else in the 1950s with a real nuclear enthusiasm. Also in Germany, you read about that people are enthusiastic about that. In a few years' time, you have your vacuum, your Hoover, powered by nuclear energy. And even when you're nuclear enthusiasts these days, that seems a bit strange thing to hope for. But that was the sentiment of the time, and it was also here in Germany. What we didn't have, we never had a military use of nuclear power. In 1955, one of a ministry was actually founded to only address issues of nuclear energy, of Atomfragen, and it later got to be known as, we still have this ministry, we don't have nuclear power anymore, and it's our research ministry, research and educational industry. And in 1975, there was an important manifesto by various German intellectuals and professors who deliberately make the choice to not go nuclear in the military regime, which would have been difficult for Germany at the time anyway, but to use it only for civil uses. Then we have a time where, yet building on this nuclear enthusiasm, we have in 1961 the first nuclear power plant in Germany. We have also power plants in Eastern Germany, which was still behind the Iron Curtain, or behind the wall. And then was the oil shock crisis in 1973. We had a huge expansion of the nuclear program, pivotal shift in Germany's energy policy from coal and oil to nuclear power. And as it takes time to build any electricity station, this pivotal shift never actually really happened as it was envisioned. But in 1974, the largest, then largest nuclear power plant in the world was built. Then comes a phase, already in the 1960s, we had some resistance against nuclear power. Close to here in Weil am Rhein, this was one nuclear power plant that was never built, but it was not a political agenda. And people were not really anti-nuclear, they just didn't want to have it in their own vicinity. And it's not this typical NIMBY approach. It was more the people in Weil am Rhein, which is the Baden area, didn't want to have Stuttgart dictating them what to do. And maybe that's also something to keep in mind. After the war, we had Bundesländer created, which were a merger of two competing countries who didn't like each other over the course of last centuries. So now starting really with the first really violent demonstration post-war Germany has seen was the demonstrations against the building of the Brockdorf nuclear power plant. We have here, again, the finishing of the Weil am Rhein nuclear power plant. And we have really very violent demonstrations against the building of the nuclear reprocessing plant in Wackersdorf, which was never built, by the way. So, and then in 1986, Chernobyl happened. The Social Democrats turned against nuclear power. The leading party, the Conservative Party, did not, but they had to react to it, and they found it, and it's quite interesting, it's the second ministry, federal ministry in Germany, founded due to discussions about nuclear power, and that used to be the Federal Ministry for Environment, Natural Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety, and is now our Federal Environment Ministry. And the Social Democrats came to power. We had the famous Energy Act for phase out from nuclear power. The Conservatives came to power again. We had a phase out of the nuclear phase out in 2010, and then in 2011, Fukushima happened. So we had the phase out of the phase out of the phase out, with the result that immediately 6 power plants were closed, and in the course of the next 10 years, all nuclear power plants were shut down. We now have no nuclear power plants, but we had a lot of waste and no repository. And that, I want to talk a bit more about the accidents and how they translate to the German context, but I think it's worthwhile noting that the original plan in the 1950s, when the 1970s, when we expanded this nuclear power regime, was to have underground final repositories for all nuclear waste, both high, medium, low. Different countries do it differently. Only the high nuclear waste really needs to be stored underground. Germany wanted to do everything underground. And the costs would have been on the operators of the power plants. There were several protests along the way. You could make a separate line of history on that. And after 2011, new sites were searched. We weren't successful for that, but it's planned that the construction starts at 2074. And until then, we have storage on sites. Storage on sites of high radioactive waste. This was never the plan. And the peculiar thing is we only have permission for on-site storage in most places, until 2047. That's the last time this runs out. So we have a real big problem. We cannot transport the things. We cannot. We don't have anywhere to put it. And some people may know it. I'm generally pro-nuclear power, but I do think that's not a good idea to leave this stuff there. And thinking about how these decisions are done, the energy system is extremely complicated. And you may wonder why I'm not, as a philosopher, giving you some theoretical insights and just bore you with this nitty-gritty details. But I do think they're quite important, because I think I would prefer that some evil person, anti-nuclear person, would have designed that and waits for the accident to happen while the high nuclear waste is stored in the places where it shouldn't be stored, and then we can all go anti-nuclear. I mean, we all went now, but I think there's no evil design behind that. It's just incredibly complicated, all these things. And it's a lot of balancing and diving into the technical details, which makes it really, really difficult for the politicians, for the ethicists, for anybody talking about it. So, yeah. Maybe just step back and look at these major impact these accidents had. So, and I told you already, Chernobyl didn't have a physical impact on Germany, but both had Chernobyl and Fukushima. The public discourse went wild on it. So could Chernobyl have happened here? No, it couldn't. Chernobyl was also a research reactor, and it was a very different reactor type. So I have two pictures here. I think I'm already talking too long. So I may not go into the details here, but an accident like in Chernobyl could not have happened here. It didn't have an impact on us. It was a terrible disaster, but no radiation above a threshold that is deemed to be dangerous could have been detected. Fukushima is very different. Fukushima can happen anywhere. I mean, you can have a natural catastrophe and that causes a meltdown, and it's a problem. You can say that, which is the case, we have the same type of reactors in the US as Fukushima. They are state-of-the-art. They have been rebuilt. Fukushima was not state-of-the-art. We had a totally different institutional embedding, and that's something that is quite often overlooked by pros and cons of nuclear power. In Fukushima, the operator and the regulatory bodies were intertwined. It was the same people operating. It was in parts the same people sitting on the regulatory bodies as were running the nuclear power side. And I think this is very peculiar because we often stress that it's a socio-technical system, but in a socio-technical system, these institutional embeddings do matter. And so it is a total different socio-technical design, even if I have the same nuclear power plant, whether I have how I set up the regulatory bodies. And I think this is quite important to notice. And so, what this is all about? Technology. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. I'm sorry. Maybe I should better look there. So, no other country, not even Japan, stopped its nuclear program after these accidents. So the question is, why Germany? And you look to neighboring countries like France, or maybe even the UK or Finland, who just started to be a nuclear power in the civil use. So what is different in Germany? And I think there are many answers you can give there, and I think for me, a quite interesting answer is given by the so-called cultural theory of risk. That has nothing to do with cultural theory. It's by Douglas and Wildavsky. And it considers societies quite simple. You have two ways of dividing societies in the way they're organized. So the vertical line gives the grid structure, the degree of social regulation, so whether you have more rules or less rules, more rules for social stratification. The horizontal line gives you the group feeling, somehow to say. So you have a high degree of social contact, of bonding, or you have a low degree of social contact, individualized societies. So do I have a... No, it doesn't work. So you see, in this very coarse-grained picture, which is taken now from John Adams, but a lot of people take it up, you see an individualistic society like the US one. You would put the US on the bottom left here. That is really not very risk-averse because you feel rather safe because you can, in inverted brackets, save yourself. You see certain countries like France, which would be put in the hierarchist tradition. You have a collectivized society, but you have strong social rules of how they are structured. And they also feel quite safe. While Germany in this classification would fall in the egalitarian tradition. We have less prescribed rules, we have a collectivized system, and you feel very insecure about natural hazards, and particular technological hazards. I mean, maybe leave aside the question whether this is a correct description or not for a moment. There have been a lot of papers classifying France and Germany, particularly with respect to the nuclear risks and the aversion thereof, in that way. And what is striking is that they look at the cultural embedding, but they completely forget about the technology, because, well, a nuclear power plant is not a nuclear power plant. There are total different reactor designs, which may be due to the culture they are set in, but they impact on the risk aversion of people, and quite rightly so, because in Germany we went for total different reactor designs. We have this federal structure and several companies, and France, being much more centralized, choose, since the 1960s, almost identical, it's a bit far-fetched, but almost compared to Germany, identical reactor designs. So you have always the same way of institutional embedding, the same security issues. So there may be a good reason to feel safer with this structure than with the other. And talking about what I think myself and maybe some of you who work in these fields have to learn, that is, I don't think that the risk discourse we have now, and since the social sciences took place and since the philosophers joined it, is interdisciplinary. It's multidisciplinary. We add our perspectives, which is fine and dandy, but I do think we really need an interdisciplinary risk discourse. And I think we are, not we, but research is sometimes fast in making the step to transdisciplinary research and including the broader public, and that is good as well. But usually it's not an interdisciplinary approach, it's a transdisciplinary social science approach. And I do think if we want to get the grasp of the energy system, the ethics thereof, I think we really have to go interdisciplinary. Maybe just briefly, before I come to the second peculiarity of the German energy system, I briefly come to the embedding we have, which is the energy union of the European Union. It exists since 2015. There have been predecessors also before the European Union, and ever when public transport got electrified, we had what we called the copper plate in Europe. I mean, there was all this exchange over borders in electricity. We didn't need the EU for that, but the EU has set certain goals and certain boundary conditions on how to trade electricity, and also certain goals for making a certain Green Deal. Energy, again, here is electricity, and it's a lot about trade and infrastructure, but also, and to a much lesser extent, gas. And it aims at building an energy union that gives the EU consumers, particular households and industry, secure, sustainable, competitive, and affordable energy. And they focus on 5 dimensions, which are all related to, you see it here, diversifying the resource we are using. It has to do also with energy security, improve energy efficiency, also being more sustained, not depending on imports of gas, for example, from outside Europe. We want to increase the share of renewable energy and go low carbon and clean energy technologies, whatever that can mean. So what can this mean in practice? Of course, a lot, but I just want to take 2 examples which are quite striking. You can trade. Electricity is a strange commodity. You just don't buy it like, I want to have 10 apples and the one seller has 5 and I take the other 5 from another seller. You cannot store it in an easy way. So what is used in the EU and a lot of other places, but not everywhere, and I would like to learn about the US here, is the so-called merit order trading of electricity. So what you do is you buy your electricity from, what you usually do, from the one who is having the cheapest offers. But you need a certain amount at a certain amount of time because it's not stored. And what's happening is, and that's a picture, a typical picture from after the war in Ukraine and Europe, I have to buy my most expensive form from gas, and everybody gets paid the same price. And that's the reason why, as a result of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the gas prices have tripled. We hardly need any gas, but the few gas we need makes our electricity bills three times so expensive, and the people who offer you solar or wind get a lot of money, which they wouldn't need, or which they wouldn't ask from you. The other thing is, and that's also where some philosophy again comes in 2002, the beginning of 2002, the EU introduced a taxonomy which was highly contested because it stated that nuclear and natural gas are sustainable technologies, at least until 2035. And that has important implications because when you're doing nuclear or when you're doing trading gas, you now can ask for funding for sustainable energy funds from the EU. You probably can guess which countries were in favor of the natural gas and the nuclear. France was pushing the nuclear, Germany was pushing the natural gas. And this channeling of financial flows is very important for you because we want to have more sustainable activities. So why on earth are these two considered sustainable technologies? And it's important to realize that it's until 2035. So these are Zwischentechnologien, we would call it in German. And I think your distinction is quite interesting that Ivo van der Poel has introduced in his earlier works, where he distinguished between values, norms, and design requirements. You can have the same values, which is sustainable, but your norms, whether you go pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear or pro-renewable, would look totally different. And again, then on the level of the design requirements, I just took the example of wind energy here, could look very different. Sustainability is good for the environment, good for living beings. So you build and you want to have it CO2-free, so you don't want to impact too much on future generations. But whether you build your offshore wind turbines high, and you have few of them with the same installed capacity, or you build a lot of them and not so high, has different impacts on the environment. We talk about green-green conflicts. The higher the turbine, the more time it takes to put it into the ground, the more the fish are affected. And it's not that, well, they'll come back later. They're just dead. I mean, they're just not there anymore. You seriously impact marine life there. So higher turbines bad for the fish. More turbines bad for the birds because they don't, I mean, when you look at a map of the European North Sea coast, I mean, it's one wind park after the other, and the birds need room to migrate. So more turbines, bad for the migrating birds. So a typical green-green conflict, and we still talk about the same. I'm sorry, this pro-nuclear and pro-renewable is hardly visible on the slide. It's very visible here. It is a contextualization of what sustainability means. We still can agree on the norm level, but on the level of values, but how we differentiate out depends on the context, depends on the time, depends on the country. And I think also that's what you see in, I'm sorry. I have so many slides at the end, I know how to click through properly. That's also what you see when you look at something you've probably seen before, the SDGs, and I called it a bit provocatively unity in values and diversity in realization. So when you zoom in on the 7th SDG, which is focusing and green and affordable energy, that's a nice goal on the level of our values. But what we need to is an indicator that tells us what to do. And the typical way of doing in sustainability these processes to come to something that you can measure is to formulate a target or various targets. These are, with the SDG 7 amongst others, by 2030, we need to ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services. Very vague, okay. And then you come to indicators for this. And now the indicators that the SDGs suggest or propose is the proportion of population with access to electricity and the proportion of population with primary reliance on clean fuels and technology. That's not a good way of measuring sustainability in the energy realm in any Western country. But thinking about it globally, I mean, most deaths we have in energy usage is not the death we have in the mining or the nuclear accidents, but it is the people who don't cook with safe fuels, who are just, the fumes kill them. So It's not a good indicator for clean energy in Germany or anywhere. Nonetheless, it's important in other areas of the world. So we look at sustainability, and it looks different at different points in time and different points in space. Here again, I skipped this one. There was again an example of a green-green conflict, but we had this before and also heard it with Adam's talk, where he talked about the lignite mine and the nice and rare and endangered flower that was growing there. I think it's important to keep in mind, no matter what, I mean, we need electricity, we need energy, but no matter how we produce it, there will be nothing that doesn't have any unwanted side effects. In German, it reads quite nice. Es gibt keinen nicht brennbaren Brennstoff. The English translation doesn't sound as good as anymore. There is no inflammable fuel. So the nitty-gritty details of energy ethics are balancing these things in the context we are at. So that was a detour from the EU, from the boundary conditions we have from top. And the boundary conditions from bottom up are our federal patchwork, which we have here, and that impacts quite a lot the energy transition. But for example, it hampers the transport of wind turbines, and that's a real problem because while in the Netherlands, okay, the Netherlands are smaller, but nonetheless, you can transport the different parts you need to transport to build your wind turbine in one night. You need to close off streets. In Germany, you need up to 80 different regulations for transportation, so it takes months, up to years, to get the parts for one wind turbine where you want to have it, because you're usually producing where you want to have it. And we have a stark increase of cost of electricity in those areas that are wind-rich, and these are the northern states. I mean, and that can amount to, because the costs for connecting the production facility to the electrical grid, which are quite high, are distributed regionally, and usually at the level of the municipality, and a four-person household can pay at the moment in the north up to 180, 200 euros more. Well, the obvious ethical questions are here, of course, questions of fairness. So I actually wanted to zoom in on another peculiarity of what I think is peculiar of the German energy system, and that it started very early onwards with renewable energy and left the momentum. And at the moment, we set out the goal, and I'm quicker there than for the nuclear. We set out the goal that Germany wants to be climate neutral, so not CO2-free, but climate neutral, that could also mean forestation or whatever, by 2045. And we want to improve the share of renewables by 80% by 2030. I mean, that's 6 years from now. So zooming in much quicker than for the nuclear history, and starting much later, I put in the focal points, the funding of the Green Party, Fukushima, and Chernobyl, and I also included the invasion of Ukraine by Russia as the central points. And the term energy transition actually comes from the German term Energiewende. It was first used a year before the Greens actually were funded, and by the Social Democrats in a paper that, interestingly enough, ordered the Energiewende going no nuclear until 2000, and particularly wanted to have energy efficiency increases, so we use less energy while we still have economic growth. Yeah. Then a big impact had actually a publication in the weekly magazine The Spiegel, which was the first public article on climate change in 1986. And the government reacted by founding an advisory council on climate change in the aftermath of this article. And that was, I think, that was the time when the discussion about climate change became public in Germany. And I think at that time it was much more part of the public debate than in many other countries. In 1990, Germany set the first reduction targets, which seemed quite ambitious, and still they were compared to 87, while all later reduction targets anywhere are set with comparison to 1990. And for the very first time, there was the idea of having feed-in tariffs for renewable power. And that, I think, was a powerful thing that gave the push to the development of renewable energy in Germany, because this feed-in tariffs meant that there was a fixed set at which you could sell your renewable energy, and it was way above the market price. So it was a way for private households who could afford it, not at 1990, but a bit later, and also for industry to make money. And it pushed a lot the development of the technologies. Then 97, and then 2005, the ratification. We have the formulation and ratification of the Kyoto Protocol. And remember that at that time, Germany was the 6th biggest emitter of CO2 worldwide. I mean, a lot of things have changed with the industry in the East and so forth, but we came quite a way, I think. 2007, we then have the EEG Gesetz. The Germans will know that. That was when these feed-in tariffs were put into a law in the renewable energy law. And also the EU formulated the 2020 climate targets. And maybe just to add something positive, these were all overshot. I mean, on average, the 2020 targets with 20% increase in efficiency, 20% reduction in greenhouse gases. And I should know the third one. Sorry, it just escaped me. 20% increase in renewable energies, of course. And they were all met, and on average, a bit more, like 22%. But 2020, you remember, there was a pandemic, maybe also a bit an easy year, but on average, that's what we reached. Germany didn't reach this goal. Germany wanted to reach 40% increase in renewables. We were at 36%. But countries like Sweden, the most great potential for renewable energies, totally outdid their own goals. Yeah, reformulation of the EEG. And then in Germany, a big thing happened. You probably all know it, the Dieselgate scandal. We have a strong car industry. There was this big scandal that there was fraudation in the software of Volkswagen when it came to emission settings, and the emission controls were the totally faulty software, and they were emitting much more exhaust fumes as they were pretending to do. In the same year, we had the Kyoto Agreement. And 2 years later, we had a ban on diesels. We still have diesel cars, but they're much more restricted now. So sometimes you need a big scandal in order to get things going, because the car industry in Germany would have never happened otherwise. In 2018, also the first time, the renewables overtake coal. And 2021, interestingly, here in Karlsruhe, we had the first time people suing against a law that was for climate protection. In 2019, we had set the goals to reduce climate emissions by 2035 by 55%. Young people sued the state because it leaves a lot for the period after 2035. And they got right, so the Constitutional Court, that's not good, you have to do better, and that's how they adopted their climate goals in Germany. The invasion of Ukraine was really hard for Germany because we depended a lot on the gas in Russia. So the first consequence was, you see it here, we had a big increase in exhaust fumes from coal combustion, but we also could get things going. Suddenly we could build an LNG terminal. In February there was the invasion of Ukraine, and in December we had our first LNG terminal set up. All environmental regulations were put aside. Then in 2024, at the beginning of this year, there was a report by the think tank Amber and the Deutsche Umwelthilfe that told us that what we estimate as greenhouse gas emission from Germany's lignite production is severely underestimated. And the numbers seem to be fraud, and it's 184% higher than estimated. So Germany's greenhouse emissions, as you see them in statistics, don't take this yet into account. It's backed up by comparison to comparable sites in Poland, and it's backed up by satellite measurements. And the data Germany uses in order to calculate the methane, it's really difficult because the methane gets out of the lignite is mined on site. So you have, depending on how deep you dig and depending on the weather, more or less methane is emitted. But the data we use, or the German government use, come from companies who do lignite mining in the 1950s. And other countries use the same technology for lignite mining and state much higher methane. So what are the current challenges with our energy transition? I just zoom in on some, and then I sum up. So one thing we didn't talk about is the electricity grid. And that's quite interesting because it raises the question of ethical aspects of the participation. So we have a strong wind-rich north, and we have most of the energy-intensive industries, not all, but a lot of them in the south. So we need to get this wind from the north to the south. We already heard it, that the wind, the energy prices are higher in the north. The government issued a private company to do this. They took on a participatory approach and adapted their approach. And that's quite interesting to follow, and it's actually a Dutch company, TenneT, who's doing it. They decided which corridor they use, and they invited the people to participate. Then they redesigned how they locate their transmission lines. And then the people who are now facing the transmission lines are, of course, not very happy because they have never been engaged in the participation process, but you need to stop somewhere. There have been various adaptations also to the complaints filed then. People particular farmers wanted to have them underground, the cables, and not overground. Then they saw what happens with underground cables. You see it here, so it's not that it's no impact and you don't see the cable, but it's also warming up the soil in the vicinity. So what happened then, the farmers or the local people didn't want to have these underground cables anymore, but wanted to have the normal transmission line. But the participation was stopped because, well, you need to continue with something. So the costs are enormous. So the costs are estimated to be 250 million euros for the transmission lines. So these are the long distance ones. And possibly the same for the distribution lines, so getting it to the consumer. So this is a lot of money, and you need public discourse on that. So you need participation. I mean, I just told you very quickly how it failed. And for a long time, and even today, quite often we hear that local resistance is, it's an expression of the NIMBY phenomenon. I'm for renewables, but not in my vicinity, not in my backyard. And it's quite interesting that the social science research on siting issues, so on NIMBY phenomenon, suggests very clearly that NIMBY is not a good explanation to start with, but it's also its assumptions are empirically incorrect. It's not that people who are advocating in the local resistance are badly informed and raising only egoistic interests, or mainly, they may do that too, but usually they are quite well informed. And they may also articulate legitimate values and interests, and these are quite often procedural values. They want to have been engaged in a different way. And I think it's pretty important to distinguish interest and values, like interest, what people articulate, and value. It's something about what we in technology assessment would call distinguish between acceptance and technology acceptability, and what we want to handle is acceptability. And I think it's pretty important if we want to get the energy transformation right, to take people on board, but then to take what they articulate as interests and maybe as hints to values, but there the actual political or maybe even the ethical work starts to distinguish the values from the interests. So I think I quickly jump over this and go to something that I find very, we need gas, so it cannot come from Russia anymore, so we go hydrogen. And that's a typical statement, that's a typical way of, you want to have green hydrogen, so hydrogen, to produce hydrogen you need a lot of energy. And this should come from renewable energies. You don't have the renewable energies to do that at the moment, so you do all kinds of rainbow analysis. So you have a blue hydrogen, which is still coming from natural gas, but it's not as bad as the gray one. We don't need to go into the details, you can look that up. But what I find striking, that's a statement from the German National Hydrogen Strategy. It says that hydrogen is a climate-friendly gas capable of virtually anything. It's combusting clearly and so forth. And I think I miss here what we said earlier, that any combustion technology will have its downsides. I mean, maybe there's some future technology out there that doesn't have any disadvantages, but a gas that needs so much energy to be produced is certainly not it. It may still be an important part of the energy transition. But I miss an honest and a good cost-benefit analysis here, maybe in the form of risk analysis or as a full life cycle assessment or so forth. And you may ask, why do I make it so complex? I mean, I said it's already complex, now I ask for life cycle assessment and risk analysis and put this all together and also look at the grid and whatever. We have a project that is looking into moralization in public debates, and it's not really findings. The project just started, but it seems that in debates about GMOs, moralizations are very explicit in the text, while the energy discourse seems to be very neutral and staying away from moral arguments. But I do think it doesn't have to, because you already have your moralization no matter where you zoom in your energy discourse. You may not even do it deliberately. Yeah. Just zoom in on the right data and you can argue for anything you want to. And make it more complex. I think any future energy technology will have the same issues. But I mean, we are forgetting about the one thing that could make things more easy, which is we hardly ever talk about energy consumption anymore, not talking about energy efficiency, which makes the picture complex again because we need technology for that. But we hardly ever talk about the elephant in the room and the energy consumption in Western countries. So I'm not going to read you through all the bold philosophical claims I made on the way and I didn't argue for. I just want to state this last green point. I do think that energy politics and also energy ethics should better address these various aspects, particularly the balancing of different values. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Raffaella. We can open the floor for the questions. If you have any question, please raise your hand and I come with the mic.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for this very detailed context sketch of Germany's energy transition story. I was just wondering, you briefly touched upon this merit order that is used in a lot of EU countries. And sometimes I look at that and I see how it's not motivational for enough renewable energy, because if you only have renewable energy, then the cost is the merit order price is set at very low. So it always almost motivates or supports having just not enough renewable energy so that the cost is higher. And so I was wondering, do we need something other than this merit order principle? And then how holistic do we need to change the energy system if we want to change those basic principles?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. It's actually all EU countries have to follow the merit order principle. And I'm not sure if it's not setting the right incentive. I mean, because the market wants to have low electricity costs. So it may send the right incentives, but just not working very well for the end consumer. And this is industry as well as us as private people. So of course you could move to other principles, and you don't have to change much for it. You just have to implement in such a way. I mean, these things are bought on the stock market like instantaneously. You just have to implement it in different software. It's not that there are other principles out there. It's just the most typical one, also worldwide, how it's traded. But you don't need any technology, apart from the software you do for the stock market exchange. On the physical system, you don't need anything to change with that.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful talk. I learned a lot. So, but what I have one myth I got from China, like said, Germany, young people only care about climate change. That's the only thing they care. So they care. So I'm wondering, do you have a kind of like a survey, like Adam shows us, like the top priorities for the German, especially for the young people? For example, the U.S., like they they care about the amount of inflations, and then so what's the priorities for Germany?
I don't have any statistics on that, but I do think it's changing, and I don't only have European statistics. It's Shell Youth Index, but they do European surveys, people from, I don't know, I think 16 to 26. And the focus on environmental issues is going down. You clearly saw the war in Ukraine and the economic impacts that had, or at least perceived had, for a lot of people, that these interests vanished, because we really had high interest in ecological issues amongst young people for decades now.
Other questions?
Thank you for lots of detail about what I didn't realize before. Clarification for me: the energy grid is integrated across the total EU now. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, we have links to most countries. Yes.
Okay. So. You can buy power from France, where it's all nuclear, essentially.
Yeah.
And so does that drive up the price of nuclear power because Germany needs to buy it in the market, and you have sort of goals for goals for decarbonization? And so it's decarboned there, and that because of the EU-wide grid, that's going to drive up the cost of some kinds of renewable power. Am I right on that?
In recent years actually, like talking about a decade now, the cost for energy got reduced by the renewable energy impact. Yeah. And that holds for all the countries who are trading. And Germany traded with France for a long time. And of course, it's something that is a bit peculiar. We close our nuclear power plants, and you saw on the first slides, we are not up to our electricity demand. Sometimes, last year it was, I think, 2% of the total electricity consumption we had to buy. So it's not a lot. And that was after the phase out, so it's still not a lot. But it was the first time since decades that we had to buy money, and well, it was 1 year now we saw, and you need to look whether this is a stable thing. But indeed, we buy nuclear power, particularly from France, and we buy, and we also sell cheap electricity to Austria, because Austria has a capacity to store a lot of electricity at times when the prices are low, because they have a lot of mountains and they pump up the water there, and they sell it back to us for a lot of money. But on average, and that's quite I found quite astonishing, the energy prices on the market went down due to the high impact of renewables.
Okay. Another sort of power politics, international politics question. The sabotage of the gas line from Norway, was it? How much did that affect Germany? And is there? I'm just surprised there's been almost no talk about that in the United States. Has that been a big issue? That who sabotaged that, and what has it been repaired? What's going on with that gas line?
I think I don't know the details where we stand now, but it has been, I think, reported a lot in the media as far as I'm concerned, and they traced it back to some Ukrainian group not related to the government, and that's at least as far as my knowledge goes. But it had a big impact that the gas from Russia doesn't come anymore, because now the trading goes even more international. So there was an increase in gas prices in Australia, and you saw it on the European market, and that's new in the last 2 years. So we, because this one line is, we have now different supporters, and this local line is away, and we depend on external gas in Germany. We depend on other areas in the world. And that was something I took out from the slides. It could also be an interesting question, what we are doing now also with the hydrogen. The policy is not to change a lot, we have this economy we have the electricity system we have. We need to fill in the gas. So we get this liquid nitrogen these LNG terminals. With the green government, we forget about our environmental regulations. We just put them aside. On the other hand, we go to countries like in the Arabic countries and buy the not green hydrogen there. We make us dependent on others because it is. I cannot. We should ask Adam for a rationalization of that. It's way beyond my expertise, but I think it's also because these are changes you cannot make on short term, but also because the system is so difficult and nobody. I mean, we talked at fPET so much about taking the bigger picture and zooming out, and that certainly holds for policymakers in this room. But I also think it holds for all of us who think about energy ethics. We need to zoom out even more than we are used to. And for us, it maybe means more looking to the technology or more looking to the policies or more to the economics, boundary conditions.
Yes, we have time for one more short question. And otherwise, we can thank Raffaella and thank you for being here and attending.